Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here, and tonight we're going to be discussing the anemic state of rock and roll. But not only that, I'm not going to just be pointing fingers tonight, although I will be pointing a few fingers, but I'm also going to be suggesting a couple of new acts that to my ears sounds fresh, valid, and perhaps pointing the way to a new and fresh sound for rock and roll. But first I wanted to discuss the album. Now the album, as we understand an album, originally it was a 33 1/3 LP standing for long player, two-sided, right? And you'd get about 5 or 6 songs a side. If you were a more progressive band, fewer than that. If you were Yes, you were lucky to get 1 song on a side. But basically, we're talking about a collection of 40 minutes worth of material, perhaps 44 minutes worth of material per album. Now, when CDs came out, albums could get longer, and we got a few of those as well. Now, in my opinion, the album really gained attention with the Beatles' release of Rubber Soul. George Martin would later recall, as well as the Beatles themselves, that they certainly knew there was a sound, a feel to that record, and that they were purposefully trying to capture that sound. They were purposefully creating an album. I've also stated that they weren't the first to do this. They were the first to do it on that level, but Frank Sinatra, a good 10 years earlier, had done the same thing. The only difference was the Beatles now put the stamp of, you better write your material for your brand new album. Now, vinyl sales have gone down and up, CD sales down and up, fluctuated over the decades, and album sales have basically gone down. Now, some artists will blame technology. They'll blame the fact that you could get almost anything, as far as music was concerned, free on the internet. And it's true, you can get a lot of free music even to this day. Changeovers from vinyl to the CD affected vinyl sales at first. You couldn't give vinyl away back in those days. And then along with the CD came the loudness wars and a hearkening back to vinyl when people started realizing that some of the mastering done on some of the CDs they were buying was pretty trashy. Radio became less popular as devices became more convenient. And so album sales slowed down a whole lot. And a lot of people think that's the end of the story. But it wasn't just all of those changes. As a music fan, I was listening to the latest and greatest albums still as they came out. And I've got to tell you, I was becoming less and less impressed with the bands I already knew, and some of the newer bands weren't impressing me much at all. I kept hearing about bands like Wilco. Now, if you're a Wilco fan, I'm going to give them a serious listen to before I say anything else about that band. But in general, when I listened to them, I just didn't hear anything that was really something I wanted to write home about. And a lot of bands sounded, it seemed to me, especially in the 2000s, like Wilco. The rock band that had a couple of guitar players in there, but sounded closer to some of the alternative acoustic music. But they were a full-fledged band, and this was supposed to lead us into the 21st century. I was not all that impressed. Of course, right around that time, some of our biggest bands started doing more touring than recording, more touring than writing, more touring than living. Now, I've talked about a few of these artists over the last few months, haven't I? We have Bruce Springsteen and his incredible $8,000 per seat tickets, and what does he release? A covers album. Bono, I've talked about Bono all last year, leading right up into this video, and I gotta say, the man can't decide whether he's an author or a rock star, and then we get news that U2 is releasing a new album. Hallelujah, right? But not only that, it was going to be a 4-disc album. The only caveat is it's going to be stuff they've already released years, no, decades ago. Now they're reworking this, and I think if it was done right, this could be worth a listen. But I fear, and I stated that in just a recent video, that I think they're going to get into the studio, and what they've done is they turn the faders down. What I mean by turning the faders down, in the studio, these faders here, each one represents a track. You don't want to hear that track, bring that fader all the way down, right? And guess what? Then you can remix it without that instrument. If that's what U2 is doing here, I'm not going to be impressed, I can tell you that right now. Now, if they go further than that, and The Edge did at least give us hope for that, he said even new lyrics were being written for some of these older songs. If they really go to the extent that they could with this, this might very well be worth the purchase. I've talked about Foreigner until I am blue in the face. They have one original member left, and he's not even on stage most of the time, sometimes not showing up at all. Mick is limousined into those concerts and limousined out before the band's even through. We have Motley Drool, who can't be bothered to record a new album. Some of them even discussing, shouldn't we record a new album, write some new stuff before we go on tour? And that whole idea was given a big thumbs down by the real power brokers of that band. And then we have the Rolling Stones. You know, this band is one of the original British invasion bands. This is one of the biggest bands to ever tour on planet Earth. And we've been promised a new album by them for years. And yet, besides the single, a great single by the way, Living in a Ghost Town, we get nothing. They go on tour, that kills Charlie Watts, and they're still touring today. Now, the Stones sound really good on these tours, but if you watch the videos of them performing, it's not the Stones that are sounding good. I've seen Keith mishit his guitar, clunker notes from Ron, and even though Mick is doing his best, he's lost a lot there. And of course, the drummer gone, it's just not the same. And this, folks, is the best that rock and roll can offer us. I say it's time for some new blood, and I'm going to be talking about 4 bands that are worth a listen to, and 2 EPs. I think the future of rock and roll lies not in the single, not in the LP, but the EP. And we're going to discuss 2 of those EPs tonight. All right, so first of all, I want to turn my attention to the band Crown Lands. Now, this is a Canadian band. They're a political band. A lot of their music reflects the lands stolen by the mother country and the plight of the indigenous people there in Canada. So if you love your rock and roll with a bit of a message, there's a band for your consideration. Now, this band can sound heavy, get down in your face rock and roll 1 minute, and yet sound rather progressive the next minute. But you know what I'm impressed with this band more than anything? First of all, they've got a drummer as their lead vocalist. They're a duo, basically, at this point. But you know what? Since Rare Earth, I've never been more impressed with a drummer who can sing than Crown Lands. And guess what? Their very latest album sounds great. Isn't that wonderful to hear? A rock band and their latest album sounds fresh. Of course, I'm talking about their brand new 2022 release, Discover Crown Lands. You've got to hear these guys, folks. They are wonderful. I love the track White Buffalo. I love tracks from their other albums. I'm just getting into them. And guess what? This is exactly what is needed in rock and roll. There's still room for a message. There's still room for discovery. There's still room for rock and roll in today's music. All right, next up, Dorothy. That's right, a band named Dorothy. And their lead singer is Dorothy. Holy shades of Alice Cooper. Only this lead singer is definitely all woman, and she has got a really powerful voice. You know, it's interesting. The band is basically a 4-piece band with a lead singer. In other words, 5 members. Here we have a traditional 2-guitar, bass guitar, drums, and lead vocalist. And guess what? These guys sound fresh. They have a heavy sound, and yet her voice is very melodic, very powerful. In fact, so powerful, they wisely bring her down in the mix. That'll be the first thing you'll notice about her vocals. And by that, I mean that traditionally, especially if you have a great lead vocalist, they'll bring them up in the mix a little bit more to feature them. And this is a mistake often. It takes away the power from a band. This band is headbanging. You can't take away its power. They needed a vocalist who could cut through that crap. And guess what? Dorothy Martin was the woman to do it. Their album, 2022, Gifts from the Holy Ghost, is wonderful. I especially love the tracks Rest in Peace and Hurricane. Hurricane's a very interesting listen because you hear they start using some 80s gated reverb, but it doesn't sound like it comes from the 80s. Here, they use an old sound to create a newer sound. I love it. And you know what? This album, like Crownland's album, is a full album. Now, Crownland's album runs a bit long. It's past the 44-minute mark. But this album is at about 36 minutes. Back in the day, you might have felt a little ripped off, a real quick album. But you know what? This album gets in, gets the job done, and on the last track, all you want to do, I've said it before, is to listen to it yet again. Now keep that 36 minutes in mind as we go along. The next band I want to feature is the band Dirty Honey. Now I'm talking specifically about their EP released in 2019, Dirty Honey. This guy can sing. This guy's got the power of Robert Plant, if not quite the range, but he sits so perfectly in their mix. As a matter of fact, the name of the band was derived at when band members were listening to Robert Plant talk about the Honey Drippers. And one of the band members said, "Oh, that's a bit of a dirty joke." And so when they decided to finally name their band, they named it Dirty Honey. How rock and roll can you get? But there isn't a cut on this recording that will disappoint you. And guess how long it lasts? 24 minutes. It's an EP. 6 tracks, each song having a wonderful length to it, and you feel spent by the end of it. This EP is the second best EP that I've ever heard in the last 20 years. And guess what? It gets the job done. And there's time to give your entire devotion to these 6 songs, full of guitar hooks, vocal hooks, melody hooks, and yet hard-ass rock and roll right in your face. Dirty Honey is the find of the year for me, folks. Now, I've talked about this next band before, but it's been a while, and of course I'm talking about the great Greta Van Fleet. Now, I've done an entire video on them before. I'll put it in my description box. It'll be up here in the corner as well. And of course, I'm talking specifically about their first release, another EP, From the Fires. Now, this EP is a little longer. It's not 24 minutes, it's 32 minutes, which gets back to Dorothy and their 36-minute album. Crownlands has a wonderful, long album. But these other bands who had less to say decided that it was more important to put out a superior product than to fill it up with a couple of filler songs. All of these bands that I've mentioned tonight are not writing and giving us filler material. They put their heart and their souls into each recording, each song, fully develop it, and that's what we're used to, isn't it, folks? Now, if you're from my generation, you know what I'm talking about. Remember back in the day when you didn't have enough money to get the good albums that were out? Instead, you got 4 out of 6 every 3 months, right? And now, it's hard to find 4 albums in 4 years. Except, if you do a little digging, there is great music out there. There is hope for this wonderful art form, my favorite art form of all time, rock and roll. All right, so if you enjoyed tonight's video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps the YouTube algorithm better do its job. It helps identify the channel to a larger audience. That's great for the tribe. We get more discussion in the comments, and I do want to hear from you folks tonight. I want to hear what you think about these bands. Have you listened to these bands? If you haven't, give them a listen and then come back to the video and give your comments. Am I wrong about these bands? These guys sound fresh. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to the channel as of yet, it is as easy as pie. All you have to do is hit that subscribe to the tribe button, then hit that top bell icon, and you'll be notified of all my future videos, not only on classic rock, but some of the best music out today, folks. All right, guys, I'm about ready to shoot my very next video, but until I can get it uploaded, why not watch one of these? I'm Michael Noland. This is always the bottom line. And guys, we are the tribe. I'll see you in my next video.